those that don't know me, it's my pleasure to be the University of Adelaide's MBA Director, and I'm Damien Scanlon. I'd firstly like to acknowledge that the land we meet on today is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respect to their spiritual relationship with this country. On behalf of the University of Adelaide's MBA program, I'd like to welcome each of you, and of course our special guest this morning, the 2011 Marketer of the Year, Deloitte Australia's Chief Marketing Officer, David Redhill, and I thank you all for coming along at this uni breakfast event this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge Professor Christopher Finlay, Executive Dean of the Faculty of Professions, all other university staff members, as well as Mr Rob De Monte, Managing Partner of Deloitte SA and a member of the University of Adelaide Business Schools Advisory Board. Welcome. Well, marketing. It's one of the most transforming disciplines of the modern world and often the least understood. Through the teachings in our workshops and courses, an Adelaide MBA graduate understands that marketing and its role in the creation, development and subsequent success of a business is absolutely crucial. Our MBA program spends time making sure that students recognise the important place that marketing sits in any modern business or organisation, both in theory and practice. It's safe to say that each and every one of us brushed past the handiwork of a marketer this morning in some shape or form, either subliminally or in your eyes or in your ears or everything in between. And it's only just beginning today. Every aspect of our lives, every aspect of business is influenced by the work that the marketing profession carries out. With the rapid and at times disturbing pace of technological change raging around us, it's clear that the world of marketing, indeed its place within the traditional structures of business and the economy, is also changing, transforming and evolving rapidly. This morning we will hear from David on the central and critical role that marketing will play in these fast evolving possibilities for business and consumers in the digital future, the future that is upon us right now. As I mentioned, David is the Chief Marketing Officer for Deloitte Australia and 2011 Marketer of the Year. He has worked in marketing, branding, journalism and photography for over 30 years in Australia, Spain, the US and the UK. David's articles and photography have been published in the Financial Times, the Times of London, the Guardian, the Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald, the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, just to name a few. We are already seeing the increasingly critical role that marketing is playing for business, and we know that many of our graduates and students, as well as those in the business community, will be extremely interested in David's views on how this instant, digital and ultimately demand-driven future might look. David's presentation will be followed by a question and answer session, so please feel free to get some questions ready. David, welcome to Adelaide, and thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Damien, and good morning, everyone. And another group I'd like to acknowledge is the MBA students who are graduating today. Congratulations. Big day. Happy day. Before we actually start, you've got a paper on your seats called Digital Disruption. It's a chunky read, not to be read in one sitting. There's a lot of interesting research in there. What we've tried to do is actually distill the essence of that into a 3-minute video. So I'll just try and run that. And if I'm not digitally disrupted, I'll get it working and come back in just a couple of seconds. Disruption. It used to happen occasionally. Every so often, a social or economic upheaval would change the way people thought, connected, and did business. Then along came the internet, and bang! Everything changed. Business feels different these days because technology has created a state of perpetual revolution. Digital disruption explodes the status quo, rewrites economics, scrambles supply chains, and blurs category boundaries. It also pushes a business into new dimensions while questioning its very survival. Every industry faces disruption, but not in the same way. As our Digital Disruption Index shows, change to your sector could be some way off, or it could be on a much shorter fuse. And the impact could be small, or a much bigger bang. Some businesses will emerge stronger, while others encounter heavier weather. The trick is in knowing how you'll be impacted and being thoughtful in your response. It starts with breaking down the problem. To be a digital survivor, there are 3 broad responses available to you. So, what are your options? Let's start with cost. Here's your cost structure, and here's that of your new digital competitor. Feel threatened? Well, how can you get more competitive? You could streamline your supply chain, replace bricks and mortar with e-tail and cut warehousing by having products made just in time. Or save on people costs by automating your training and recruitment. Putting your admin in the cloud could save you money and create a more mobile, flexible workforce. Now, about your revenue. It's drying up. How can you replenish it? Replace your old sources with new ones before you really feel the heat. Digital lets you target new sectors and customers in a more granular way. You can also access new geographies and adopt radically new business models yourself. You could also shift things around at the level of your corporate strategy. Which of your assets are declining in value and ripe for divestment while you invest in new ones for growth? What about the new risks of the digital landscape? And could the risks of inaction be even greater? Does your business have the capacity to act decisively and fast? At a national level, Australians expect greater efficiencies and productivity in government. At Deloitte, we believe that building the lucky country needs a robust debate on how to use broadband and other digital solutions to shape policies. Education, defence, health, media and public services are just some areas that will benefit hugely. Ultimately, digital disruption will affect every corner of Australian business and society. The question is the length of the fuse and how big the bang will be. The answer is whether you're prepared for the worst and ready for the best. Okay. So I was out for dinner last night with Rob DeBell, who kindly opened this opportunity for me to come and speak this morning, an old friend of mine. And Rob was saying, you know, how is it that businesses like media companies are being so disrupted right now and so challenged in their core business models when this has been obvious for 20 years? I mean, the internet's been around for 20 years. And it's interesting, when you think about it, it's almost like the many myriad of changes in the business sector are very incremental. One of my colleagues used that rather disturbing metaphor of a frog in boiling water. You know, it doesn't actually hit you in the face, it creeps up on you until you realise you have to change. And when we look at businesses like Harvey Norman and Jerry Harvey in particular, it's almost like they're in this state of denial up until a point where they realise they have to change. But in another sense, as consumers, we know that our lives have been transformed. You know, we all use iPhones or Blackberries or alternatives and can bring the world to us at our fingertips. But if you think about business, it hasn't changed that much. The fundamentals of how we do business in the office and in the way that we connect our workforces outside the workspace haven't changed dramatically since the 1990s. While the consumer environment has radically transformed over the last 10 years and continues to evolve at a pace, the business environment has yet to experience those fundamental shifts. What I wanted to do very quickly this morning was set a little bit of the context of the landscape that we're dealing with, using as a basis this interesting study that our colleagues at Deloitte Access Economics did, which is the first sort of comprehensive analysis of the magnitude of disruption affecting 18 core Australian industries and the timeline on which they are, because some of them have fundamentally been disrupted, some of them are just about to experience it, and some for some, it's some time off. First up, we know that this large, profound changes are happening to business in the way that people access information, the way they connect. It's a misconception, though, to think that this is about technology. When people talk about the digital revolution, they tend to think of, well, it's an IT issue in business, and therefore the CEO should be talking to the CIO about how you position your business to respond to this. And in fact, when you think about the impact it's having on people's lives, people access and consume information. They make purchasing decisions differently. In fact, it's a way of living. You know, it's not just about technology, it's about business, and it's a core proposition that starts with the strategy and the business model. We know that entry barriers are down. We've known that for some time with the leveling effect of the internet. You know, obviously, for a small business in, I was speaking to Jonathan a few minutes ago about his business is exporting 80% of its product. When a business can all of a sudden have a global audience out of Adelaide, and where you're actually competing with businesses from Bosnia and Chile in our own market, you know that the entry barrier is almost non-existent. The expectation of people in business is also radically transforming. You know? Once again, it wasn't all of a sudden here at Deloitte that our head of IT had to recognize that we had to open up the floodgates, but almost by the sheer weight of numbers of people coming into the work environment at Deloitte using iPhones, using iPads, and demanding to be connected to our internal network made it inevitable that we had to actually shift. And so the bring your own device environment where it's about user centricity is driving this change in business. And the change for the business looking outwards is continuous. Although only 18% of businesses in Australia have mobile apps right now, within the next 5 years it's going to be 50%. So businesses realize they have to get connected and build their businesses around consumer demands fast. The interesting issue is the disruption is uneven across industries. This research that Access did, which took in about 18 different criteria, the degree of consumer exposure, the degree to which IT was driving the production process and so forth, sketched out this map where we looked at, as I said, magnitude of change, top to bottom, the impact of change on business, and the timeline of change, left to right. And as you can see, some of the biggest businesses sectors in Australia, including our own professional services, are in that top left quadrant, the short fuse big bang. And they are the businesses that are actually shaking out and dramatically transforming their whole approach to addressing their audiences. And I guess the point of this presentation is about audiences. You know, when you think about the me generation, I taught myself iMovie the other night, and I was just reflecting on the fact that all the Apple products, beginning with I, it's almost ironic because it is all about me. It's all about I create the world as I see it, I navigate it on my own terms, I assemble my network around me, and that's the big paradigm shift. It used to be that we consumed information in the way that we were given it. Now we access it on our own terms. And that has profound impacts on the way we do business and on the role of marketing. Because marketing was traditionally about taking a product, marketing it almost didactically in a one-way sense, and using a feedback loop over time to actually refine the offer to sell again. Now it's almost a continuous feedback loop where we can actually garner information, seek ideas from the crowd as to how to improve the product and how to improve the selling process, and improve it continually, because we know that an alternative is just a click away. This was an interesting example. Just yesterday is Australian Financial Review, the MBA program over there. And I thought that was perfect for this presentation. Me first. This is not just about consumers making choices about alternatives online. This is about voters making choices and demanding more transparency in government. This is about health patients actually wanting to access their records and their information and make considered choices about alternatives. This is about students like yourselves creating an MBA program around your own desires and your own needs. Once again, it used to be, this is the course, take it or leave it. If you don't like it, find another one. Nowadays, it's about, well, how do you want to study? How do you want to learn? We do on-campus recruitment at Deloitte. It used to be that we printed brochures that went out of date within a month or two and wasted a whole lot of trees, but that was our way of actually connecting with potential recruits to our business. The way we do it now is we create an iPad app which allows a potential recruit to explore the world of Deloitte on their own terms and once again create their own experience. It's all about you. Problem is, though, that the most business leaders in Australia still don't quite get it. Tony Boyd, who writes Chanticleer on the back of the AFR, he had a look at our business disruption index and he nailed the issue. He said most CEOs in Australia still don't quite get it. They don't understand that the most important C in business isn't the CFO or the chief of operations or the CIO, it's the customer. Businesses have to put the customer at the center of their whole proposition because never before have so many alternatives been available. Problem is, a lot of businesses are in denial. Where consumers have infinitely more choice, where an alternative is just a click away, our clients as Deloitte and businesses in general have no choice but to reassess the whole way they engage with their audiences and the way they are structured to actually deliver a different experience. So the way we actually broke it down, and I examined this through the filter of marketing, thinking, well, what are the obvious ways that a business can respond to digital disruption? You know, there's a lot of analysis out there. There's a lot of interesting observations and insights being drawn from the digital revolution, and there's a lot of adulation of industrial-grade, wealth-generating business models that are succeeding and getting ahead. But there's not a lot of advice to businesses about how to respond in a methodical and step-by-step way. So we tried to address this and say, well, most measures of business success revolve around are they doing an efficient cost model, how are they generating revenue, and what is their corporate strategy? And so if you break it down in that sense, look at people within business. How do you actually bring how do you respond to the opportunities that digital gives you with people? And it's not just about cutting costs. It's about making your costs go further, getting people more efficient, more mobile, more connected through mobile, more flexible. And that's the way the world is going, rather creating jobs around people rather than fitting people into jobs. The supply chain, as it extends into new jurisdictions, offshore and into the cloud, just as overheads can actually be put into cloud, if you think of admin, marketing, finance, IT, all that can go into a virtual environment. As revenues need to be replenished, we obviously think of new segments and new geographies. That's what the internet gives you. But new business models which actually create virtual distribution opportunities, which have very little infrastructure and replace warehouse space with virtual production processes, there are huge opportunities there too. And if you think about the asset mix, there are parts of the business which are diminishing in long-term viability and other opportunities which need to be brought online. Risk management, people tend to think of risk as identity theft, security, penetration and so forth. The greatest risk in this age is of not doing anything, of waiting for it to happen to you rather than doing it to yourself. And that ladders up to this idea of corporate flexibility and the capacity to act. How can you reorient your investments, your people and your capital into a part of the business for rapid growth versus, once again, being a hostage to fortune and having it happen to you? Now, looking across those areas, marketing has a huge role to play in all of them. Now, I tend to think of marketing in professional services context less about brand eminence. Obviously, thought leadership, events, advertising and so forth, the traditional paradigm of marketing is ever more relevant. But more so, your audience are your best brand evangelists. We know that the best, most savvy online businesses are actually tapping into the collective wisdom of their global audiences to get ideas, to rate their products, to get feedback to help them improve and in effect help them sell more effectively. Similarly, internally, to actually get your people engaged in the brand idea, a business can actually transform its own workforce into its best brand evangelists. New segments and new geographies. Obviously, marketing's role in exploring opportunities for sales, for tailoring product to local cultural nuances and regulatory environments. New business models. Marketing must perform the core role in assessing the market opportunity, garnering intelligence around product or service, resonance in a market, fine-tuning and distributing, and once again, building that feedback loop into the process. So whether they're at the people sort of business unit, individual and granular level, whether it's across divisions within a business, or whether it's at the enterprise level, you have to actually look at a proactive approach, engaging with your audience, whether it's internal or external, to get the most out of this opportunity. So it's interesting to see this Fast Company article just a couple of weeks ago about why CMOs are facing extinction. It's about the old world idea of marketing being price, product and placement instead of the new world of possibilities where marketing doesn't really work behind the business strategy but works at the center of it. I think it's an interesting challenge for marketers, given that marketing has made a long journey from the fringes of many businesses, certainly in business-to-business environments, like IT did many years ago. If you think of information technology, it used to be batch processing on mainframes down in the basement of a business, and you'd send off payroll once every month and it'd come back and then you'd send something else down to process it. Well, if you think of IT now, it's really it's all around us. It's the way we do business. IT has become business. 20 years ago, we used to think, 40 years ago, there was a digital computer. 20 years ago, there was a digital telephone versus an analog telephone. Well, they're not. They're just telephones. They're just computers now. And digital business is just going to be business because that's the way business gets done. And marketing exists at its core. It's the data. The salvation to marketing's future and why it is ever more important to a business's survival is through the insights that we can extract, model, and use to shape business strategy. There's a lot of talk about the amount of data being generated by the tens of millions of devices that are around us and that we're using ourselves, that track our every move, that actually talk about our preferences, that feed back to these giant portals that actually help businesses understand our preferences and how we want to shape the world around us. Customers increasingly expect businesses to use that data. This was interesting from the web. I just got it last week. Customers expect us to use their data to target them, says Boots, the chemist in the UK. They expect them to use their data to target them with personalised messages across all channels. So it's not as though, the notion of privacy for anyone with a child under 15 years old is almost disappearing. Therefore, the CIO and the CMO is the most important relationship for business's future. Obviously, the CEO and the strategy of the business and the way the operations of the business are run is core to the business's health. But in terms of competitiveness, and in terms of understanding what an audience wants, how a market will respond to a strategy and an approach, it's the data and the strategy and the creativity nexus of the CIO and the CMO. And that's where marketing's role becomes interesting, because if you think of marketing operating at both the center of a business in actually pushing the core business proposition and the culture in the direction of what happens at the edge, which is the outlying innovation, the edge of the business, which has to break new ground, marketing now has to exist at both. because marketing has to explore new opportunities and where the business is going. The third horizon, if you like, of a business is over the horizon disruptive innovation, which will afflict your business. It may mean you have to cannibalize your own business. It's marketing's responsibility to shoulder that challenge. Apple does that very effectively. If you compare Apple to Sony, why did Sony, with such a brilliant ownership of the mobile music market, fail? It was because the way they were structured and the silo-esque mentality across the business, which saw them fail. Whereas Apple, with its very fluid, organic structure, the ability to tap into, once again, collective wisdom, what a smart business model. Get 100,000 developers around the world to develop apps for your platform for free and for the honor of appearing on your website. Fuji and Kodak, another classic example of how two businesses, one got it right, one got it wrong. Kodak didn't see the disruption coming, and they wanted to hold on to the legacy revenue of hardware, but instead of embracing the digital revolution. Borders and Amazon. Borders wanted to continue building better bookstores. Amazon embraced the fact that people wanted everything at their fingertips all the time. So just in closing on marketer, I think of marketing as it's a movable feast of a profession, and there are three types of marketer traditionally. There's the financial, strings-pulling, spreadsheet marketer who understands price, product, and placement. There's the operations leader who understands that formula, but also knows how to deploy resources across the business and mobilize parts of the business to deliver effectively. And then there's the creative ideas-led marketer who's all about the brand and who thinks brand first to galvanize audiences behind the idea. But the digital age is interestingly bringing up this idea of a new sort of a marketer, which is what I call the connector. And if you think of the first age of marketing as being one-way marketing, advertising was, as I said, didactic. The declaiming from the pulpit idea about the brand, which you had, the only choice you had was to listen to it or to not listen to it. The web introduced this idea of a dialogue for the first time. For the first time, consumers could talk back, and brands recognized that they had to have a relationship and establish a relationship that evolved with their consumers. With the advent of social media, though, and digital, and the ability of businesses to collect the data that social conversation is telling them, it's almost a diaphanous, transparent web of information, which is always happening and always accessible, that's actually blurring the boundary between the business and the audience. And that's the ideal business model, is where you can get your audience to actually help do your marketing for you. The marketer's role in this environment is simply to make connections. Ideas, products, feedback, distribution. The marketer of the future may not have the idea or be particularly good at the finance, but the marketer of the future understands the message, understands the medium at their disposal to tap into the opportunity, and delivers it. Ultimately, it's about the data, how you use the data. Tomorrow's organizations will manage the customer as the most valuable asset, the most important C in business, if you like, and intelligence about the customer will be the key to all competitive advantage. And in a world of change, that's the role of, and the challenge, and the enthralling opportunity of tomorrow's marketer. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I used to always think that the customer used to be the centre, and now maybe it's come full circle. But listening to that, education, and particularly universities, are facing that challenge, and even MBAs, specifically the area I'm interested in, is facing challenges because you can get an MBA from anywhere in the world 24/7 online. So we have to think about, well, where is the place of universities and buildings and the technologies and the teachers? And that's a real challenge for us, and I guess we're thinking about how we can make our MBA more perhaps relevant. And next year we're thinking about really personalising the journey, because I think that's exactly what it is. It's about me. We really are in a world now where we have to think about the journey and the transformation, and that's something that we're concentrating on. Also, we're going to be thinking about how we do actually manage disruption on a daily basis, and complexity management is going to be something that we're going to be helping our students, with some interesting tools and opportunities to think about how the world is interconnected, and linear thinking is probably something in the past. So we've got some challenges, and I'd be curious, and we're going to open up the floor for questions, but I have a question to start with. Where do you think education is going to go in this world? And please, we've got a roving mic. After David's finished that, we'll be looking for questions from the floor.
Just get that off the screen there. Education, well, once again, it's about understanding that the student of tomorrow wants to shape the education experience around their own needs and their own desires. I guess once again, we see in business the breaking down of silos and more cross-disciplinary. The businesses that are really successful are actually merging data with distribution, with sales, with internal education and so forth. I can imagine a future where the barriers between clearly structured degree courses are actually beginning to blur. So we see a formal structure for an arts law degree today. Well, why not a pastiche of disciplines where someone's actually taking leaves out of art, law, economics, and the sciences? Because convergence isn't just a buzzword used in technology, it's also in the way that people think. And the most agile thinkers coming out of business schools are often the people that have had real-world experience from various different industries beforehand that can combine them. So, drawing on multidisciplinary training bases to actually create degrees around how you want to experience the world, I think that's inevitable in education.
Questions? Over there, Neil, sorry.
David, my name's Amanda. I'm the marketing manager for Rundle Mall. Given your example of borders versus Amazon, so, bricks and mortar versus online, and the fact that the retail sector is in your short fuse Big Bang quadrant, they're on a pretty short timeline, and I guess there's no doubt that online is going to have an impact in retail in Australia. I'd just be interested in your insight into what the bricks and mortar businesses can do in the short term to stay viable and interesting to their customer base.
Sure. We're always talking about how you add value into the traditional mix, and certainly a lot of Australian retail is actually generated through these giant malls, and I think individual retailers have to put pressure on their custodians or their landlords to actually create a much richer, more interactive and valuable experience to traffic, to customers like ourselves, to actually make it a better experience than being able to do it online. Once again, talking last night about, well, why would you, if you know your shoe size and what colours you want, why would you bother going to a shop these days? So they really need to explore how advice in alternatives, modelling, and added value experiences. Borders and Amazon are great examples, because you've got to be prepared to cannibalize your own business and set up an online business in parallel with your bricks and mortar to actually create an end-to-end rich experience. And it may be that some retail operators understand that, in fact, their retail, their physical presence is a loss leader. It's really there to promote the brand and promote the experience of dealing face-to-face with the brand, even if nothing is sold through the outlet. So it's an interesting challenge, and we're obviously seeing, with tough regulations in Australia. I know that Maya are actually wondering about Sunday trading, because we're the only country in the world that has such aggressive overtime, double pay for staff, and yet that's not the biggest trading day of the week. So yet their strategy to go online has not really matured, and they haven't made that shift yet between in-store experience and online experience. And it's really about creating that sequencing of experience from the user's point of view to provide value at every point.
Just, that's quite a straightforward comparison because bricks and mortar and the online environment, but what were your insights, or if you have any insights, around Research in Motion, the makers of BlackBerry and Nokia, who just didn't seem to want to move, and they had such dominant positions? Do you have any insights around that?
Yeah, I tend to think of product design as an incredibly important ingredient in this mix, and the basic difference between BlackBerry technology and smartphone technology, I think made the world of difference then. Once people can once again, if you can minimize the interface of your product design to make it once again ever more easy for the person to create the experience on their own terms, sizing photographs, exploring the web visually, the elegance of the interface of a product, which makes it almost seem invisible. The greatest, I do portion a lot of the success there to design, because people ignore design that ignores people. Just as in the digital age, people will increasingly disregard businesses that disregard their needs because they've got an alternative. If design isn't built around the user experience, people will go to the alternative that does. And I think BlackBerry is still tied up in the in an old world sort of approach to, this is the way we've designed the product, this is the way you will use it, versus iPhone or Android, which is, we give you a screen, you do what you want with it beyond that.
Any questions?
David, is anyone getting it right?
There aren't that many big businesses getting it right. What we're seeing is a lot of great startups, retailers getting it right, but they are purely web-based models, which are set up in the low-cost model, if you like. Some of the, as a service business, I think Telstra's getting it right, because Telstra is really conscious of audience opinions. It has social media analysts working round the clock to actually monitor and gauge the opinions and the passions and the frustrations of its customers online, and they're constantly intervening, not to actually try and douse down the flames, but try to help and intervene and try to provide a better customer experience. So businesses that recognise the power of the crowd's opinion, and there are a number of traditional Australian businesses that are doing that, they get it. But in terms of recreating their entire business model and making the shift, there are fewer examples. I do think of the challenge facing a business leader is profound. I was in the first .com boom in San Francisco. I talked to someone at Charles Schwab, the online brokers, and the classic dilemma of how you move and when you move was very evident to them, because generations of stockbrokers whose fathers and mothers had been stockbrokers were being challenged with this idea of the online opportunity, and yet there was this real cultural resistance inside the business to making the change. But as this guy said, we have to cannibalise our own business. We want to do it to ourselves rather than having it done to us. But the cultural challenge and the mind shift within the business is often the most problematic. The businesses that are getting it right aren't embracing the technology better than their competitors. They're actually getting the mindsets of their leaders and of their staff around the change that they need to make. To embrace a new business model top to bottom and respond with the customer as the point of the equation is hard to get your mind around when you've traditionally created products or delivered service in the one fashion. So it's a long answer, but I would say we've got a long way to go in Australia, partly because we're such an oligopolistic business environment, you know, 2 supermarkets, 1 main telecoms company, 1 main airline, you know, there's not a lot of competition out there, and there's a degree of inherent arrogance that they can keep on delivering business like that. That's rapidly changing though, because lower cost models and virtual alternatives to almost every product and service category are appearing, and that's why the best businesses are taking it seriously. Yes.
My name is Megan. I'm from Vice Chair of Australia, that's the agricultural and I noticed on your chart, agriculture was sort of long queues short. So long queues big bang. Professional services was short queues big bang. I'm just curious, as Deloitte Professional Services, what have you done differently in the digital sphere of engaging with your clients?
We absolutely recognise that the feedback from our clients and the way we build that into the customer experience is our main differentiator. The way we actually respond to that. The way we also gather data from across the business. The way we actually look at reams and reams of information that we've amassed over the years, and the way we're building it into the delivery capability. The way we're actually equipping our workforce. When I talked about brand custodians in Deloitte, as any professional services business, in fact any service business, where the people are the brand, and you can destroy the brand experience almost instantly, no matter how much advertising that I do as a marketing leader or event management. It only takes one bad service experience by delivery by a consultant to destroy that. So most of the work that we do is in equipping and aligning our people to actually deliver a consistent brand experience. And a lot of that comes down to using technology, because we use something called Yammer, which is it's like an internal microblogging site, internal Facebook behind a firewall. And we flatten the hierarchy, and it's almost a democratic ideal inside a business where you're really exploring issues, client opportunities, sharing problems, tapping into that collective wisdom of a business, Australia and worldwide, to enable us as a business to deliver a much better experience. Now that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. So we have been fundamentally disrupted, and we have embraced that. Agriculture and mining, you know, there are elements of agriculture which have radically changed. You know, I have a friend who's a farmer who spends half his time looking at the sky and worrying about his wheat, and the other half he's looking at weather maps and looking at data and looking at global market prices and so forth. So he's obviously embracing the opportunities of digital, but the basic process, as in mining, of extracting mineral from the ground or from growing product, refining it and distributing it, has not yet changed. They haven't come up with a better way of actually doing that process. So we see the fundamental shifts as being a little further down the line than something which is so, you know, competitive and contemporary as professional services or financial services for that matter. Yeah.
The iAwards recently, and there was a talk there where the state government CIO, Andrew Mills, said that he thought the days of the CIO were going to come to an end. And the reason for that is exactly what you talked about, the silo mentality. And without integrating technology in with the business at the CEO level, it was just not going to work. People weren't competitive. Do you think that, in line with what he was saying, that perhaps the marketing expertise that we really need to have CEOs that are tech and marketing savvy primarily, rather than CMOs and CIOs?
Yeah, great question. And it's little, what was it, Mark Twain, who said, rumours of my death have been greatly exaggerated? It's like Paul McCartney reading of his death in the London Times. I think the CIO is going to be around for a long time yet, but that role is going to continue to evolve, and certainly every business needs technology infrastructure, needs mobile app deployment, needs software training and so forth, needs to actually manage a budget. But your question around is a bigger idea around the role of executives and leaders in business and what sort of new skills that they have to acquire and become illiterate in to be effective leaders. And you're absolutely right. You know, our CEO at Deloitte was probably the biggest technology maverick and prepared to take insane risks that I've ever worked for. In fact, he was goading me as the marketing guy is usually supposed to take the risks. He was goading me as being a digital dinosaur because he was all over Yammer and Twitter and before I was. It's to say that a CEO of the future who is very comfortable in the virtual environment, very savvy about the role of data in shaping corporate strategy, and the ability to blend those those humanistic skills and creative skills about the way you affect change as a business, because the agile business of the future is the one that will thrive and survive, versus having to spend all your time internally focused on managing change. The person that just gets it and can lead and set an example is the leader of the future. And I think the CMO, the CIO, Chief Operating Officer, and the CFO will continue to build on their core disciplines, but they all have to, at a certain point, start merging their thinking as well to create the integrated organisation. It's almost like an organism more than one that's broken down into to silos. It's one that's almost cellular and it's connected virtually through technology, but also by integrative thinking. And we talk about one discipline which is emerging in business internationally, and it's called design thinking. And it's simply about thinking backwards, putting the customer at the center of the proposition and then breaking down tough business problems by starting from a point of view of developing strong empathy for the client or the students or the patient's experience, and working backwards to actually figuring out how you enhance and improve that experience. And that increasingly is reversing the traditional business process of we produce it and then we sell it. Well, no, we actually ask before we even create anything. We don't create products and then go in search of a market. We know what people want, and then we go and figure out how to give it to them.
Are there any more questions? No, I think David, you just described the Adelaide MBA
when you were talking about the type of people that we have to actually provide into the marketplace, and in actual fact we did exactly that this year. We did the design thinking process. We looked at what the end game should be, and we worked back to say, well, we've got to make sure our MBA is actually going to be able to produce or transform our graduates with the attributes to be able to cope with complexity and integration and disruption. I think the American Army calls it VUCA: volatility, the unknown, the complex, and the ambiguous, because the world isn't predictable anymore. And I think we have to accept that that's just part of life now, but I think that's the opportunity, and the smart ones will embrace it, and that's where our role comes in, is to be able to produce graduates that can embrace it and provide the opportunities in the new business landscape. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this morning. And David, thank you very much. We've got something for you, which I'll give to you just shortly. I'd like you all to say thank you to David with a warm round of applause. I think it's been a very insightful... For those that are interested in doing an Adelaide MBA, we've actually got an information session coming up on October the 10th, and you'll hear some more insights as to how we are repositioning our MBA. There are pamphlets out there as well, and so if there's any information you'd like, I'm available. Also, other staff members are available. So thank you once again, and have a lovely day.